For more than 150 years, humanity has been making steady progress along one of its ugliest fronts, dating back to the American Civil War and progressing through World War I, then World War II, and then near-modern conflicts. War became slightly less bad. Sure, war itself is not a particularly good outcome in general. We all knew that already. However, the human outcome for those involved was becoming ever so slightly rosier. You might still get wounded, but conditional on that, you were more likely to survive. Unfortunately, the war in Ukraine is reversing that trend. And I know that it is cliché at this point to say that drones are revolutionizing warfare, but they are. And this is all their fault. Weirdly, though, it is not for the reason that you might think. Yeah, they cause casualties, no surprise there. But what makes drones different is that they cause fatalities, and a large part of the real problem that they create is over there, in the hospitals. Today, we look at the story of the modern battlefield, and what some folks are trying to do to get the positive trend back on track. Let's pause for a second. How do people die in war? I realize that may sound like a stupid question. They get shot, or worse. Either way, you put them in a cemetery, and that is that. Except it is not. Go back to the American Revolution, the winter at Valley Forge, and all of the non-combat fatalities due to freezing temperatures and lack of supplies. Or how about the American Civil War, where clean drinking water was far from a priority? Yes, dysentery also caused death outside of the Oregon Trail. Or how about World War I, when roughly similar numbers of American soldiers died from the Spanish flu as actually, fighting? It took until the 20th century for war itself to be the primary cause of death, where that remains the case in Ukraine today, even if winter still creates a bunch of headaches. But even the way that a soldier dies via a combat-related pathway has evolved over time. Let's journey back to the Civil War. You just got shot near the hip. Fortunately, it is just a graze wound. You are bleeding a decent amount, but it is nothing that a bit of pressure will not solve. Except none of us have any idea about the germ theory of disease, and that bullet penetrated some very filthy clothing before grazing your hip. Now you have an infection, and oops, you are dead. Or maybe you got hit with some cannon fire. Sadly, it really did a number on your leg. We're going to have to amputate, but you will survive. Except we still have no idea about the germ theory of disease, and so we are going to use a bone saw that is all sorts of contaminated. Now you have an infection, and oops, you are dead. At the risk of getting slightly off topic, friendly reminder that President James A. Garfield, a full 16 years later, likely died not due to his assassin's bullet, but rather because the doctors kept inserting unsterilized fingers into the wound. Anyway, back in the Civil War, if you were lucky, maybe your surgeon was out of silk to close the wounds and had to resort to horsehair instead. Tough as it is, horsehair had to be boiled first to work properly as thread, which accidentally sterilized the sutures. Oops, this time you are not dead. Eventually, we as a species started to figure things out. By World War I, medical care for war wounded started to feel more like a science. And despite inventors finding new and seemingly more effective ways to kill people, the doctors won out. The wounded-to-kill ratio for the United States improved over time. By the 21st century, the United States had gotten this down to a science. The Golden Hour principle became an integrated part of strategic planning, with the name referencing the idea that critically wounded soldiers needed to be treated within an hour if we wanted to give them a good chance of survival. Tourniquet technology evolved to where soldiers could self-apply what is called the combat application tourniquet to their hemorrhaging limb, saving lives when no one else was around, and obviating the need to put someone else at risk to render medical assistance. Ambulances no longer consisted of horse-drawn buggies. Helicopters could now rapidly evacuate soldiers, and it was possible to put those who needed special treatment on a plane back to Europe. Robert Gates, Secretary of Defense under Bush the Younger and Obama, even established a doctrine to not pursue missions where it would be impossible to medevac a soldier in less than 60 minutes. The cumulative consequence of all of this is the chart that you see here, with the wounded to kill ratios for each US war slowly trending up and then spiking. It peaked in Afghanistan, where only 1 in every 12 wounded turned into a fatality. If time were to only march in one direction, then we would expect the picture in Ukraine to perhaps look even better. Yes, there is some apples to oranges comparison here, because Ukraine is not the United States. The battle is being brought to them, and they do not have the logistical network that the United States relied on. And sure, there may have also been some initial rough patches as Ukraine reoriented its medical industry to the war, relearned knowledge forgotten after the war in the Donbass cooled off, and discovered the idiosyncrasies of the new battlefield. This is known in war medicine circles as the Walker Dip, named after former British surgeon Vice Admiral Alistair Walker. But as the war progresses, things eventually get better. The point is, holding fixed all of that, we would expect to see some good numbers coming out of the killing fields after 4 years of fighting. If only. Obtaining accurate data on this is hard enough, never mind trying to obtain accurate data in the middle of a long war where the parties have strong incentives to fudge the numbers. But the ratio in Ukraine is somewhere around 3-1 or 5-1. Note that the estimates are slightly worse for Russia because the Kremlin orders attacks with reckless abandon and does not issue proper kit. Perhaps you remember the rumors of new recruits receiving instructions to purchase tampons, as proper bandages to stop hemorrhaging were in short supply. But the main issue is not the lack of supplies. It is something new on the battlefield, and in fact was not central to the battlefield at the start of the war. Indeed, we could summarize why the benefits of modern medical marvels have suddenly fallen off in a single word: drones. The problem here is threefold. One is how drones strike their targets. Another long-running trend in warfare is an increase in the percentage of casualties caused by explosions versus bullet wounds. During the Civil War, only 9% were from explosions. For Afghanistan and Iraq, that number, exploded to being 81% from explosions. The upshot is that explosions are not particularly accurate, and as long as you are not on top of the blast, your chances of survival are higher than you might suspect. If you look at the physics of an explosion radius, the concentration of shrapnel maximizes at ground level and dissipates with the radius as you increase the angle. Consequently, and this was true at the start of the war in Ukraine, lower body injuries were more common than upper body injuries. This is fortunate from a survival standpoint. As long as you can stop the bleeding, a lower body injury is unlikely to cause death. However, drones have taken over the battlefield. Like everything else, obtaining accurate data here is difficult, but drones now almost certainly account for the majority of casualties, and I have seen estimates range as high as 80%. Worse, drones reverse the direction of attack. Unlike artillery shells, they have pinpoint accuracy. Operators go into first-person view and specifically wait until they are on top of the target to detonate. And because the explosion comes from above, now the force concentration is on the upper body. The second problem is the degradation of medical infrastructure. Traditionally, you keep forward surgical units and field hospitals off the literal front line, because you do not want to put them in harm's way, and would prefer a place of relative tranquility to treat the wounded. However, the gray zone in Ukraine runs multiple kilometers deep, with some claiming that it extends more than a dozen. It puts Ukrainian medics in an impossible situation. You can situate yourself in the gray zone and hope that the Geneva Conventions will protect you, which risks your own health, the health of the wounded, and all of your medical supplies. Also, this is Russia that we are talking about, so maybe you want to think twice about the helpfulness of Geneva. Alternatively, you move further back from the front line, delaying the time between when a soldier gets injured and when he can begin receiving treatment. Even then, you are not particularly safe. According to the French Central Director of the Armed Forces Health Service, 70% of targets hit by long-range fire are military or civilian medical facilities. To give medical treatment, of course, assumes that you can evacuate the soldier at all, which brings us to the third drone-induced evolution. Imagine that the soldier survives the initial strike. What happens next? Well, if this were an operation in Afghanistan, the golden hour rule would kick in. Fellow soldiers would reach the wounded individual, pull back to a safe distance, and call for a medevac. And because the United States would have established air superiority long beforehand, a helicopter would land and deliver the wounded soldier to a proper medical facility in rapid time. None of that is happening in Ukraine. Neither side ever established air superiority over the course of 4 years. But on a more fundamental level, even reaching the wounded is a challenge.
The picture we're seeing in Ukraine is really complex and really difficult, and we really need to change the way that we approach this problem set.
That was Lieutenant Colonel Niall I. Mung, head of the medical branch at NATO's Allied Command Transformation, or ACT for short.
In contrast to what we saw in Afghanistan, the picture in Ukraine for casualty evacuation and medical evacuation is radically different. So the transparent battlefield means that people are able to constantly see and target any medical assets going forward. So as a result, we get injured people at the front line. Someone tries to go up to rescue them, but then they're also being hit by drone strikes or fire strikes. And so people are spending either prolonged times at the front line or just cannot be evacuated at all to get medical treatment.
It is the old sniper's trick. Use a wounded target to bait more targets to expose themselves. After all, the quadcopter that caused the initial injury is not the only one out there. For Ukraine, it means that minutes tick off the clock from that golden hour without anyone coming to help. Well, as ancient philosopher Davidus Chapelius once said, modern problems require modern solutions. Correspondingly, it is a puzzle that NATO ACT has been working on. Indeed, one of the ways that NATO tries to address deficiencies like this is to partner with industry. You might remember the last time that we discussed one of these initiatives, when I went to Istanbul to learn how interceptor drones work, and what they were doing to reduce the effectiveness of Russian Shaheds. Well, back in December, Allied Command Transformation hosted one of these innovation challenges in London, focused on golden hour medical treatment in the gray zone. So I went to the airport, got on a plane, flew for 16 hours, and landed in Estonia? Yeah, it turns out that the Innovation Challenge was the same day as the cybersecurity exercise in Tallinn. You remember, the one where they showed me nothing, but that was the point? So despite the generous invitation to see some innovation, I had to play catch-up.
The ACT-led Innovation Challenge in December provided a huge number of innovative solutions to problems in Ukraine at the moment. We started with over 100 different applicants from 20 nations, which was whittled down to a final 10. But that final 10 covered a huge range of innovation from extreme point of injury care all the way through back to specialist hospital care.
One of the more common innovations proposed was to create healthcare technology that does not emit an electromagnetic frequency. This is a complete afterthought in a civilian setting. On a battlefield, though, if you light up the EM spectrum, then suddenly a drone swarm comes down on top of you. But the winner of the Innovation Challenge focused more on the pure medical side. Hemorrhaging causes the majority of battlefield deaths in Ukraine. Obviously, bleeding out is itself fatal. However, stopping the blood loss by, say, applying one of those tourniquets from earlier is not the end of the wounded soldier's problems. Kidneys struggle to function properly when your body has insufficient blood. Back to the Lieutenant Colonel about the innovation event.
And the winner was a solution called Kidney, which provides renal replacement therapy. So this is a hugely logistical intensive type of therapy, but it needed a huge amount on the battlefield in Ukraine because of the types of injuries that they're seeing. There's a lot of patients developing renal failure that need renal replacement therapy. This was a portable renal replacement solution that needed a lot less water than you would normally expect. And while it provides an immediate solution to a problem in Ukraine, it's also got the potential to completely change the way that we would deliver renal replacement therapy outside of conflict and in a normal hospital setting.
How effective they will be on the battlefield remains an open question. Regardless, the issue itself is one that will continue to require further innovation. NATO does not just view this as a Ukraine problem. It is a general problem of modern warfare, and it will affect NATO troops wherever they may next go. Thanks to Allied Command Transformation for talking through what happened in London. Periodically, they post new innovation challenges on their LinkedIn page. If you work in industry and think that you might have solutions in the future, they will want to hear from you. Meanwhile, if you want to see the cybersecurity exercise that I did not see, then check out this video. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.